Hello, everybody. Welcome to Research Talks Qualitative Conversations. Today, we will be talking with Dr. Karen Campbell about a course she's teaching for us this summer. My name is Ray Mayetta, President of Research Talk. My colleagues, Jeff Petrozelli and Paul Mijas, are joining me. Karen will give a little bit more of an introduction to herself in just a moment. But first, I'm going to ask Jeff to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Jeff Petrozelli with Research Talk. I'm a qualitative research specialist here.
Thank you, Jeff. And Paul, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Paul Mijas. I'm a qualitative researcher and consultant at the Audit Institute at UNC at Chapel Hill, and I'm also a consultant with Research Talk.
And both Paul and Jeff joined Research Talk in 2001, which was a fabulous year for us. So great things happened for us there. So Karen Campbell is teaching reflexive thematic analysis, identifying, analyzing, and interpreting patterns of meaning for one day on August 1st. And Karen, if you don't mind telling us a little bit more about yourself and how you came to a place where this course gained meaning and you began to share your knowledge.
Sure. Thanks for having me here. So my name is Karen Campbell. I am an assistant professor at the School of Nursing at York University in Toronto, Ontario. And I am, in addition to being a nurse scientist, and I do a lot of qualitative research. I've been involved with Research Talk for many years and certainly have been inspired and learned so much from what I've done here. I think that one of the reasons why I came into reflexive thematic analysis specifically is through some of the applied qualitative health research that I do. So applied research, meaning that it's really based in practice and wanting to get some actionable outcomes. So really applied work that I'm doing, and theorizing is great and philosophizing is necessary, but some of the work that I do is really for practice-based professionals or people that are working in places where they really need some answers now. So reflexive thematic analysis became really important to us because it is certainly a well-known analytic method in qualitative research, but the reflexive part also really resonated in terms of how do we ensure that we're positioning ourselves and recognizing our own preconceptions and using those in the research, using them in the best way in the research that we're doing. So how do we come to a place where we are thinking about what we're seeing and why we're seeing it, but also what we might be missing and really coming to the data that way.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Karen. When we think about the being presented as a course, as you know, you've been so richly involved in so much we do, but especially our courses. Folks come and they have all sorts of different motivations to bring them there. What's nice is if we can start out and you can just think about, if someone's saying about what do I get if I spend this day learning with Karen, how would you respond to that? What would somebody get from taking the course?
I think that depending on where you are in your journey, in your qualitative journey, and it's going to be very different for a lot of people. I think for some novice researchers, it will be really helpful to really think about what are the steps that are in reflexive thematic analysis. I think that if you are working with somebody else and needing to teach somebody else how to do this or work with somebody to do it, I think it'll be helpful for those people as well to support somebody that might be doing thematic analysis. And I think myself as a professor, just the students that I'm working with, sometimes it's difficult to kind of give them that guidance, and yet you don't want them just to flounder on their own. So I think that that's important. I also think that for some people that aren't sure about how to use theory, how to involve theory in how does this work within a space of reflexive thematic analysis, I think that they might also get that from it. So just being aware of how does my own perspective work together with this, and being able to articulate it. So just to recap that, I think that the three things that you might get that somebody might take from this course is just the practicality. What are the steps and how do I do it? I think too, if I'm supporting somebody else or somebody on a team, how do I do that? How do I help people on my team, whoever that is, to do this work as well? And I think, again, how does my perspective, how am I using theory? If I'm using theory, and if I'm not using theory, how does my own perspective come into this as well?
Great. Thank you so much. So, Jeff, let me turn to you. I know you do a lot of thinking kind of before these conversations, and let me invite you into the conversation.
Yeah, Karen, when I look at your description, there's a phrase that stands out. You talk about in the class, we'll cover the transformation of data into meaningful patterns and themes. And I really like that the imagery that kind of brings up. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what that process is, what it looks like.
Thanks, Jeff. I think that this part about meaningful, I think is really helpful here. So oftentimes when we have qualitative research, the first thing we do is some sort of coding or organizing or sorting through whatever. That's kind of the first step. And I think that what somebody might take from, again, from this course or learn from this course is, how do I work with this data to get more out of it? So how do I goad meaning from this data so that I'm not just stuck at this surface level, which is great place to start, but then how do we get deeper into it? So I think that that's one of the things that might stand out from this course is, how do I move from that descriptive place into a place, a deeper place of meaning? So just thinking of a project that I did recently with students that were exposed to a sexual orientation and gender identity simulation, and they actually reflected on it, and another group of students that were in China reflected on it, and then the Canadian students and the students that were in China, they both swapped their reflections so they could read what each other's perspectives were. So on the surface, we might see things of, I didn't know that was the perspective. I didn't know their healthcare system worked like that. And so we might say like there was a lack of knowledge. But then on a deeper level, we start to get into societal's values and what do we value and how do we see people. And so to be able to move from that really surface level into a deeper level.
Beautiful, great. The stories of examples really, really help, and your engagement. When you work with folks, are there particular areas that people struggle to kind of integrate in learning? What are kind of the challenges people have in uptaking different parts of the process?
Well, this is a good question for you to ask me, Gray, because I think that one of the difficulties comes. There's a couple sticking points, and I think I've learned this from you. But the first is just familiarize yourself with the data, and I think I've learned this from all three of you. Just read it. Don't highlight, don't touch it, just read it. So that idea of immersing yourself and giving yourself permission to do that, I think is one part that becomes difficult. I think the next part that is difficult is when we get to a place of diagramming. So during the course, the intention is, and we'll see how it plays out with the group that's there that day, but the intention is to think meaningfully about and intentionally about how we diagram, because it's so important to this process and so important to help thinking move forward.
That's great. And I am also struck in listening to you today, but also just having worked with you both in teaching and thinking through the way you work. It strikes me that, of course, it's work, but there's something for you that you're very intentional in your work, but it also feels like we were talking about meaningful in a different way, but it seems at a personal level, this is meaningful for you and challenging in a good way, kind of like you geek out with it. Maybe even it's fun once in a while. And it's great for people to hear about that. So I was just wondering if, you could comment on that piece of it, that this process itself is something that keeps you intimately involved in what's happening when and in what ways.
It's funny that you say that because I do geek out quite a bit over qualitative analysis, and I see you all smiling, so I know you probably do as well. But I think that qualitative analysis, however it's done, and reflexive thematic analysis is one way to do it. There's lots of other ways that are also really good. But one thing that strikes me, and I think maybe something that I offer that's a little bit different to reflexive thematic analysis, is the idea of working together in a group. So I find that when you get to a certain point, it does help to come together, even if it's like this in a Zoom platform, in a world where researchers get together and can think together. I think that so much magic happens when we start talking to each other about the data that we have. So I think that that's one of the magical parts, one of those meaningful parts that make it fun for me, is that reflexive thematic analysis doesn't have to be something that you're doing on your own, but something that you can do with a group or a team. And it's certainly in my paper, but I also will talk on August 1st about what that looks like. What does it look like when we're coming from different places and different perspectives, different experiences? How we all have different positionality, and so how do we think about our own reflexiveness as a team, as a group? And I find that really fascinating and really fun.
Yeah. I saw like the hand motion you just did through the
I really have to stop talking with my hands.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. You're in good company talking with your hands in this group. But it really is, there's a fit, and that fit isn't always apparent and it's not always obvious, but part of it is continued engagement in what exactly is the place of this new discovery with not just knowledge, but practice as well. And that's the other piece of this. You started us off and you really emphasized and underscored the word applied. So there's this working with during analysis and then kind of the segue after. So that, and again, tying back to that word meaningful, this is kind of a commitment beyond just who do I speak with, who do I learn from, how do I engage what they said, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I really think reflexive thematic analysis is a good option for many researchers. I'm obviously depending on their research question, the data that they've collected, but I do think that in the end, our research is analyzed so that we can come up with some good implications and future directions. And I think that by the time you get through those 6 steps, you're left in a place where it becomes really apparent what was important, and then to be able to take it then to that next place of okay, so how does this impact policy? How does it impact education or research? So I think that that's such an important part of the work we do.
Wonderful. So Paul, yeah, let us know where what's on your mind as we're learning more from Karen.
Right. So sometimes I meet with researchers who are new to this and they worry about finding the right themes. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how this course might help people just kind of trust the process and kind of just allow the data and the voices in the data to provide openings for the deeper dive that you talked about, and not worry so much about this idea of getting it right.
It's funny I keep saying that, but you did take the words right out of my mouth in terms of trusting the process. So it is part of trusting the process. And I think because of where we're starting in this course, starting with just what is thematic analysis, reflexive thematic analysis, and why reflexive thematic analysis, but really that practical stage of here are the steps and here's what each one of them means. I think that is going to help people that might be feeling anxious going into how do I pick a code and how do I work with that? And also recognizing that there are steps of revising those codes. And if you are working with a team, to be able to, and I know that your team does this all the time as well, where you start talking to each other and saying, why did you come up with this? And thinking about what did this mean to you? What are the nuances of it? Because in the end, whatever we call it is just what we call it. Like a table is a table because I call it a table. I can call it whatever. but what's the meaning behind it? So to move from not worrying about what words we're using, but to capturing the meaning of it. And eventually trusting the process will help with the codes to come out in a way that is meaningful. So hopefully learning, starting from that place of what are these 6 steps and what do they all mean, and breaking that down, that through the day that'll become really clear. And I really hope that people leave with a lot more confidence in their ability to do this.
That involvement, you talked about the 6 steps. And I think sometimes people, when they hear steps and they think about steps, they think of them in isolation. But there's something, you've used the word process and context a lot today in great, powerful ways. So those steps, while they happen in a similar sequence as you move through, they're not isolated at all, are they?
I certainly don't think so. I think a lot of analytical work that's done in qualitative research is secular. So you may go from step 4 to step 1 to step 3. These things might happen. I think having a foundation of this is what they are is a good place to start from. And then as you go through that, if you recognize, wait a minute, I'm learning something new here. Maybe I go back to the beginning, and start over. Maybe I go back 1 step and think about this again in a new way. I don't think that that there's necessarily a right or wrong way to do this, but I think having that foundation of knowing that this is a good starting place. And again, I go back to familiarizing yourself with the data is the first step. And so if you get to step 3 and all of a sudden you're realizing that I think I went through this way too fast and maybe I need to go back again. Listen to the transcripts at the same time that you read the transcript. If you've got an audio and you've got a written or whatever it is, if it's blogs or if it's vlogs, if it's documents, there's lots of different data collection items that we could use with this method.
That's great. And that's great permission that you're giving people to, it's okay to say, you know what, let's just go back and do a deeper look, just even at a way to familiarize ourselves again with data and that movement back and forth. Sometimes people get so locked in and they feel like I've ruined it all if I, did step 3 and now I move back to step 1. In fact, it's all part of what may very well happen. So that giving that permission is so important. When we think about folks who come to the summer intensive and our other professional courses and where they're at, there are many people who have a specific project who know very well, I am going to use this approach. Other people who are figuring out, who am I as a qualitative analyst? What approaches might I do? I've read the books about it. I've heard about it. But then there are folks who may not ever do reflexive thematic analysis. And one of the things we're asking all of our scholar instructors this year is, what do you think any qualitative researcher in the class? Why should anyone who's, especially kind of career qual people who are just, as we were talking about, geeky about qualitative, what do you think somebody can get even if they don't really see a concrete place for reflexive thematic? What are the general takeaways that you see any qualitative researcher benefiting from?
I hope this isn't a contentious thing that I'm about to say, and I may reserve the right to take it back. But I think at the end, good qualitative work is good qualitative work. And I think that that's going to be something that anybody can take from this. Good qualitative work to me involves being really familiar with your data. Good qualitative work to me is about understanding your own positionality. And I would even say that's just research in general, not just specific to qualitative, but research in general, to be aware of your positionality. And so that reflexive part of reflexive thematic analysis, I really want to leave people, anybody, with that, and why it was so important to Brown and Clark to include that reflexive part of reflexive thematic analysis. I think that's something that any researcher can take from this.
Great. I want to check back in with Paul and Jeff and see if there's anything that's kind of popped up as we've been talking.
I just really with that reflexive piece, I know we keep coming back to that, but I think it's something that, and you've talked a little bit about this, but I think it's something that a lot of people in qualitative, especially people that come from more of a mixed methods or quantitative background, I think sometimes it's a kind of a little bit scary in a way to kind of face your own role in this process, your own positionality. So and I know just from knowing you, you kind of exude that comfort. You make people comfortable. But within the process of reflexive thematic analysis, how do you kind of get somebody to kind of think that way? Think about their role, their positionality within the research process. Again, it's something that doesn't come natural to everybody, depending on your background. So just how do you kind of draw that out of people?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I think that there's a few things. Often when we talk about bias, I think people immediately think about, how might I feel about a certain group of people, or how might I feel about a certain institution, or something like that. And I think that I hope to inspire people to think a little bit more broadly than maybe, like, I know that I come from a position of privilege. I'm well educated. I'm a white cisgender woman. Like there are those things, and I think that those are kind of, again, those surface things. And then I think that there's a deeper delve into whether we realize it or not, we're not a theoretical beings. And so what kinds of theoretical perspectives do I come to this with? So I am definitely a feminist, and a very proud feminist and mother of little feminists. But that does affect how I see the data. So even to encourage people to think beyond just who I am, like a middle-class working white woman, beyond that, and to also think about what motivates me. How do I feel about bigger issues? And I don't want to get into it now because I don't want to scare anybody, but on that day, to really think about kind of what kind of glasses do I put on? What kind of glasses do I put on to see the data? And yeah, I'm going to leave it there.
Great.
That's great. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah. And then just in closing, more than the vast majority of people I know, you're so aware and conscious of your own progression and evolution as a scholar. And when you think about your journey in this regard, is there any story you can give us of that was a real good point of discovery for me that really strengthened my ability as somebody doing qualitative analysis, specifically working with reflexive thematic analysis?
Interesting question. Yeah, you know what I think is perhaps my answer would be, one, I think that all of the pieces leading up to the analysis point have to be well thought out. So I think that this is one of my learnings. One of my learnings was to come to analysis and realize that actually I don't have the best data. Did I ask the right questions to the right people in the right way at the right time? And if you've been to any other research talk events, you might be familiar with that. But I think coming into it with a good data set is helpful. Not that it has to happen that way. But in terms of a story, I'm going to say that a lot of the work that I have done has, and I'm quite open with this, a lot of it is me et al. With the sort and sift, think and shift. A lot of my work has done that. But I think sometimes reflexive thematic analysis is a good option. There are times where you might want to do something else, and then you realize, well, wait a minute, with this data set, this may be the best way to do it. So I mentioned earlier I kind of think of them as pen pals, the Canadian nursing students and the Chinese nursing students, and them talking back and forth to each other. And the data set that we have is essentially very descriptive. It lends itself very well to thematic analysis, and the team is very comfortable with that. So I think sometimes there's openings for different types of of analysis methods. I think that that's been a good learning for me.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to thank you for your time. Really looking forward to spending more time with you in the summer, especially on August 1st. As you know, one of us will be the admin for your class. And so there'll be a wonderful conversation about, hey, I want to sit with Karen's class. So we're all looking forward to the time with you. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Paul. And of course, thank you, Karen. Looking forward. So appreciate your time.
Thank you.